Um, so we are here to examine the thesis of Master of Science, Sarosh Koirala, and he will defend his dissertation, Aspiration, Emotion, and Imagination in Culture of Migration. The opponent to examine his thesis is docent Tina Seppala of the International Development Studies. As the custos appointed by the faculty, I declare this public examination open.
Distinguished custos, honored opponent, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here today. My dissertation begins with a simple question. Why do people continue to migrate even when they know the journey is uncertain, even when the risks are well known? Migration scholarship offers many answers from various perspectives and at different levels of analysis. At the micro and meso level, scholars look at individual and household motivations. At the macro level, scholars look at structural conditions, economic inequality, labor markets, political institutions. Functionalist approaches see migration as normal, necessary process that balances labor supply and demand across regions. Historical structural approaches see migration driven by colonial history, global capitalism, and global inequality. These perspectives all are important, and I do not challenge them. My dissertation argues that factors indicated in these dominant theories do not automatically or directly drive migration. Instead, they become meaningful through what I call culture of migration. It is within this culture that people interpret what a good life looks like. It is within this culture that people decide whether staying or migrating is a good choice. My research makes three main arguments. First, economic and historical structural conditions influence migration indirectly. They are filtered through the culture of migration and translated into migration behavior. Second, this culture is sustained by shared social emotions surrounding migration. Hope, desire, obligation, pride, shame, and the fear of being left behind. These are not only individual emotions. They are socially shared and they are collectively reinforced. Third, migration trajectory and experiences are shaped by geographical imagination. People migrate not only towards places they know, but they also migrate towards places they imagine. Let me begin with a story, and this story inspired the whole research. In February 2022, I was doing early fieldwork. I was in a relatively prosperous neighborhood in Kathmandu Valley. The houses there were modern with gardens and security cameras, but I noticed something unusual. There were almost no young people there left anymore. An elderly man explained it to me. He said, there are no young people left here anymore, only grandparents remain. Almost every household had its young members living abroad in Canada, in Australia, in the United States, or somewhere in Europe. A few weeks later, I visited an industrial town in southern Nepal. The main roads there were filled with educational consultancies and recruitment agencies. A woman I met told me something I still remember. She said, it feels like soon there will be only children and old people left in our neighborhood. Later, I did fieldwork in a rural municipality in western Nepal. There I saw a different reality. Families were selling farmlands. Families were taking large amount of loans, all to send one family members abroad, sometimes through dangerous and irregular routes. One young man told me, even if it means going through Russia or walking illegally across the borders, people are still trying to go. Everyone knew the risk, and yet people continue the same path. This was not only something I found as a researcher, it was also part of my own life experience. I grew up in Nepal. I migrated when I was 19 years old for higher education. I have now lived as a migrant for 17 years. Looking back, I find it difficult to remember young people from my generation who were not thinking about migrating. This brought me to the central question of my dissertation. Why has migration become so normal? My article looked back over 2 centuries of history. to try to answer this question. It begins with a Laure tradition. More than 200 years ago, Nepali men began serving in foreign armies, first for the British Army and later in the Indian Army. This brought income home, it brought prestige, and it made working abroad feel both respectable, normal, and worthwhile. Over time, this pattern grew. Labor migration expanded to India, later to Middle East, to Malaysia, and more recently to Europe, North America, East Asia, and Australia. Each generation built on the migration experience of the one before it. Migration became more than economic strategy. It became a social expectation, and choosing not to migrate began to carry a quiet stigma, especially for young men. This history also helps explain more recent events. For example, when some Nepalese recently joined the Russia-Ukraine war, I do not see this as an isolated event. It is another expression of the migration culture that has developed over several generations. So if migration has become so culturally normal, what makes people feel it both attractive and necessary? This brings me to the second article of my dissertation. When people talk to me about their decision to migrate, they rarely described it as purely voluntary. They rarely described it as purely forced. Instead, they expressed two feelings at the same time. They had the desire to migrate, and they also felt that they had no real choice. I framed this using two Nepali words, rahar and badhyata. Rahar means aspirational desire. It is the hope for a better future. Badhyata means a felt sense of obligation. It comes from the insecurity and from the social pressure. Almost every participant expressed both feelings. A young person might say, I want to study abroad because I dream of a better future. Then in the very next sentence, the same person might say, but I also have to go because there are no opportunities here. This challenges a very fundamental distinction in migration studies, the distinction between the voluntary and the forced migration. In reality, for many people, desire and obligation become intertwined. I also found something else interesting. The same social experience can produce both feelings at the same time. Let me give you an example. Imagine a family sees their neighbor's new house, a house built with the money earned abroad. That house creates rahar. It inspires people to imagine the same success for themselves. But that same house also creates badhyata. People start comparing themselves to their neighbors, parents worry about their children's future, young people fear falling behind their friends. So the very same symbol produces both hope and pressure at the same time. These emotions are reinforced everywhere in everyday life. Educational consultancies advertise studying abroad as path to success. Recruitment agencies present labor migration as obvious solution. And social media constantly circulate selective stories of success abroad, and the state policy are innovated to cater all these drivers. This finding led to my third article. This article asks how the culture of migration spreads across the whole community. One participant gave me a sentence that I have never forgotten. He simply said, everyone is leaving, so am I. People do not make migration decisions alone. Their decisions are shaped by what their family is doing, what their neighbors are doing, and what their friends are doing. Migration gradually becomes almost a rite of passage into adulthood. The question stops being, should I migrate? And it becomes, where should I go? One strong mechanism here is social comparison and feeling of relative deprivation. As more people migrate, remittances arrive, new houses get built, and so staying at home can feel like a failure, even when good local opportunities exist. Another mechanism is what we now commonly call FOMO, the fear of missing out. As people constantly see their friends studying and working abroad, the emotional pressure to follow them grows stronger. The migration norms spreads into two directions. They spread horizontally among friends and families into the wider communities, and they spread vertically across generations. So children grow up with migration already built into their imagined future. My fourth and final article asks a different kind of question. Why do people choose one particular destination over another? Why Finland and not Thailand? To answer this, I turn to the concept I call geographical imagination. This means the way people imagine places they may or may not have personally experienced. These imaginations are built and shared in the community, and they are shaped by the historical memory, shared stories from social media, and from individuals who have already migrated to those places. This article is based on interviews with Nepali migrants here in Finland. Very few of them had chosen Finland because they knew a lot about Finland specifically. Instead, Finland was understood as part of a much larger image. Many participants simply call this image Europe or the West. It was a symbol of opportunity. The West was a symbol of security, a symbol of better future. In many ways, people were migrating towards an idea just as much as they were migrating towards a country. But many participants also described a gap between what they had imagined before leaving and what they have actually found after arriving. Some people found unexpected difficulties finding work, many faced language barriers, some experienced loneliness or discrimination. I call this expectation-reality dissonance. And importantly, this dissonance does not simply end the migration story, but it begins a new one. Some participants adapted with whatever Finland offered them and built or tried to build a meaningful future here in Finland. Some began thinking moving onward to yet another country, and some began considering returning home to Nepal. Crucially, these new experiences do not stay only with individual migrant. They travel back through people, phone calls, through conversations, and through social media. A migrant's experience here in Finland becomes part of someone else's imagination in Nepal. In this way, geographical imagination keeps renewing itself generation after generation. Together, these 4 articles answer different parts of the larger question. The first article explains where the culture of migration comes from. The second explains the social emotion that sustain it. The third shows how it spreads across community and across generation. And the fourth shows how imagination shapes both destination choices and later migration experiences. My broader theoretical conclusion is this. The factors emphasized in dominant migration theories, the economic inequality, labor demand, political conditions, the structural factors are not the direct cause of migration. They only acquire real meaning within the local culture of migration. That culture acts as a bridge between the economic, historical, structural conditions and individual decisions. Let me close by reflecting on what this might mean beyond academia. When governments discuss migration policy, the conversation often focuses only on economics, create more jobs, increase wages. This matters, and my research do not question that. But my findings indicate that this is not enough on its own. Creating jobs and improving education addresses what I call badhyata, the structural pressure to leave. But addressing pressure alone does not necessarily change people's aspirations, emotions, and imaginations about place. Young people also need to believe that they can build a meaningful, respected life at home. This means challenging one assumption in particular, the assumption that success can only be found abroad. My finding also matters for destination countries like Finland. Migration does not end when someone crosses a border. How migrants are treated or what they experience after arrival shape the stories that travel back. And those stories shape the whole imagination about the country. For example, how Finland will be imagined or treated in Nepal in future will depend on how Nepali migrants are being treated or they experience here today in Finland. Before I finish, I want to acknowledge the limits of my work. My research is grounded specifically in Nepali context. The concepts of rahar and badhyata come from Nepali society and from Nepali language. My evidence comes from my fieldwork in Nepal and from interviews with Nepali migrants here in Finland. I do not claim that these findings apply automatically everywhere. That is an important question for future research. But I do hope that the broader integrated framework, the culture, emotion, and imagination shaping migration decisions may prove useful in other contexts too. If I had to summarize the whole dissertation in one sentence, it would be this. Economic and historical structural conditions do not produce migration decisions by themselves. They become migration decisions only after they are interpreted through the culture of migration, a culture that is shaped by its history, by shared emotion, social expectation around migration, and imagination about place and future. Finally, allow me one personal note. I began this research because the question was deeply connected to my own life. I grew up in Nepal, surrounded by conversations around migration, and I left home in search of education and opportunity. I lived both as a researcher studying migration and as a migrant experiencing it at the very same time. The stories my participants shared with me challenged many of my own previous assumptions. Migration is rarely a simple economic calculation. It is about uncertainty, it is about hope, it is about family, it is about belonging, it is about imagination, and about people's effort to build the future they believe is possible. I hope this dissertation helps us see migrants differently, not simply as economic actors, not only as victims of economic or historical structural forces, but they are as people whose decisions emerge from their history, culture, emotion, and imagination all together. Thank you very much for your attention. I now respectfully invite you, honored opponent, to present your critical remarks on my dissertation. Thank you very much.
Yes, everybody, welcome to this wonderful defense today. I want to thank opponent for introducing us, and also I want to thank the candidate for an excellent Lectio. So it opened up actually quite a lot of the themes that we're going to discuss today. And according to the official procedure, so I'm supposed to give a brief opening statement at this point. So I will start with that. In reimagining and examining aspiration, emotion, and imagination within the culture of migration, the dissertation of Sarosh Koirala addresses a highly relevant and conceptually underexplored question concerning why migration persists despite uncertainty and widely recognized risks. This is a case study focusing on Nepal, but which clearly has much broader relevance in Finland, Europe, and globally. In the context of Nepal, the study is particularly timely in light of recent developments, especially the Gen Z, meaning the Generation Z-led political mobilization that took place in September 2025, and which has led to big political transformations in the country. As author himself very insightfully notes in the thesis, this is a movement that articulates widespread frustration with governance failures, limited opportunities, and the fact that there is not credible futures for the youth. So this is a signal of things that this change generation who is engaged in this migration movements and migration cultures is also trying now to contest and transform these kind of structural conditions that exist in the country and which have made migration necessarily in the first place. So this is kind of potential disruptor in this culture of migration. It opens up new questions for sure. I think that this is also really much kind of opens up for reorienting this kind of idea that when these future generations co-construct the country and shape these futures together, so that how then these migration cultures are not fixed, but that they are continually produced and contested and potentially transformed in relation to all these social and political processes that are taking place. And I would like to add that additionally, this ongoing internal forced displacement that has taken place this year from April onwards in the riverside and slum communities in Kathmandu and elsewhere in Nepal. So this is also a fact that underlines the complexity of this kind of migration dynamics and blurring the line between what is voluntary and what is forced migration. This thesis is significant for several reasons, and it travels more broadly beyond Nepal. So when we think about the recent events, for example, in Ceuta and elsewhere on the borders of the global north and global south, as during these very insecure times, there are a lot of people on the move. Either they're escaping conflict and war, persecution, or natural disasters, which are sort of strengthened by and intensified by climate change, but also because people are in search of better livelihood options and they look for better education opportunities. So in many countries, migration has become a politicized issue, and it has directly influenced political regimes, even toppled some governments in the process, and it has unfortunately given rise to right-wing populist political parties that are painting a very simplistic view of migration as a phenomenon, and when they try to boost their support of their own voter base and to gain political power. So I think that this thesis sheds light on multiple different migration-related aspects and trajectories, and it takes part and contributes to several theoretical debates. So it is clearly situated within migration scholarship, and it critically engages with dominant economic and political and historical structural approaches, while advancing a culturally and emotionally informed perspectives. And it draws from several traditions of research, showing how migration becomes normalized, meaningful, and reproduced not only across space, but across time, across different generations even. So to conclude my opening statement, I say that this is theoretically very innovative, empirically grounded and reflexive work, and it produces both new empirical knowledge and it deepens existing theoretical discussions, especially with regard to aspiration, emotion, and imagination. And it also develops totally new concepts and categories of its own. For example, the rahar badhyata framework that was mentioned in the Lectio, and we go to more detail about it in the discussion, but also this experience reality expectations reality dissonance, which is a novel contribution which explains how aspirations and imaginations do not always meet with the reality, and how these imaginations and aspirations are not static, but very much dynamic and transform.